So real quick, mobility is just your joint's range of motion. Okay, what's the expression in terms of range of motion through any given joint? Stability is that joint's ability to control and stabilize. Okay, so kind of the strength and the integrity of any particular joint. So we're actually going to go back to infant development. When you're born, you have absolute mobility. You can put your foot behind your head, you can twist your arms all over the place. You are super mobile, but you don't have very much strength or stability. You've never been asked to have to stabilize very much. And so when you're born, let's say you're laying on your back, you will start to kind of turn your head, develop a little bit of stability through the neck. Eventually you develop a little bit more core stability, so now you can finally roll yourself over. Once you do that, you start to explore the environment by picking your head up, more stability through the neck. You start to develop that cervical curve, so now you're starting to dictate your posture. Eventually you get to the point where you start to push yourself away from the floor with your arms, so now you're developing some pushing pattern stability through the chest, the shoulders, the triceps. Again, you're going to develop a little bit more curvature through your back. Then you get the core control and the hip stability to be able to pull your legs up under you. Now you're on all fours. So you're in a crawling position. Now you get some contralateral movement through the opposite glute, opposite lat. So now we're starting to coordinate some patterning. Again, going to develop a little bit more of that lumbar curve through that position. Then you develop to the point where you're grabbing onto stuff and you're kind of pulling yourself into a squat pattern. So you're developing that stability and that core control, that motor control of the squat pattern. Then eventually you stand up. You wobble for a bit, and then you fall back down. So you're learning, you're exploring that environment, and failure is absolutely crucial at this stage, right? So getting up, falling down, absolutely crucial to this process. So as we can see, the mobility is there, and then the motor control and the stability is earned over time. Okay, and then eventually we put the kids in big shoes and sit them in a desk for 6 hours a day, and they start to lose that mobility because they're not having to explore the environment as much, unfortunately. So now we're going to talk about a joint by joint concept, and that's what this comes in. So this was really kind of coined and developed by Mike Boyle and Greg Cook. Give them due credit for that. But basically what it's telling us is the body is designed in layers. Okay, and so we've got mobility in orange and then stability in green. And we're going to start from the bottom up. So the foot, we can see that it's green here, the arch. It should inherently have a lot of stability. If it doesn't, we have issues. If you have no stability in the arch, then the arch isn't doing what it's intended to do, which travels upstream and affects the ankle and the knee and then the hip, so on and so forth. So the foot wants to inherently be stable. The joint at the top of the foot is the ankle. So the ankle wants to be able to express a certain degree of mobility or movement. If it cannot, again, it's going to affect upstream and potentially downstream. Okay? So if we imagine that an athlete taped their ankles really, really tight with a lot of athletic tape, and then we ask them to go out and perform their sport. Maybe it involves squatting or lunging or running. The mobility restrictions in the ankle are going to have to be taken up from somewhere else. A lot of times, that slack is taken up through the knee. So that could be a potential issue. So speaking of the knee, it should be inherently stable. Okay, you don't want to come in and have someone manipulate your knee and twist it all over the place, pull it, twist it, torque it. That would create instability and laxity, something that the knee does not want. So if you did that and you stretched your knee out a bunch and then you went to do some lateral shuffles or whatever, you're at an increased risk of damaging those connective tissues, so we don't want to do that. Now the hip, we're going to talk about the hip in relation to the lumbar spine. Okay, so the hip itself should be very mobile. Okay, it should be able to express a large degree of movement, whereas the lumbar spine should be fairly stiff, fairly stable. Okay, now if your hips are stiff, okay, a joint that wants to be able to express mobility, if your hips are stiff and you go to do a lot of movement, whether it's golfing or bending over and picking stuff up, doesn't matter what it is, the stiffness in the hips is going to force movement into the lower back, which again is a joint that doesn't appreciate a lot of movement. That's a stiff, stable joint. Okay? So if you have a lot of back pain, then you may need to assess how mobile are your hips? If you realize that they're very tight, inflection, extension, internal rotation, external rotation doesn't really matter. If there's some tightness and restriction there, it's probably going to travel upstream to your lower back and could potentially travel downstream to some knee issues. Okay, so the mid back, the thoracic spine, it should be able to extend and flex, and it should be able to rotate. If it cannot, same thing. You're going to see downstream issues and potentially upstream issues with either the neck or the shoulders. Okay, now the shoulder socket itself, and then also the scapula or the shoulder blade, they need a degree of mobility and stability. Okay, so you should be able to express a lot of range of motion through your shoulder, okay, because it's that open socket joint, but it also needs to be inherently stable because, again, it's not supported by too much bony landmarks. It's just connective tissue and muscles that basically hold your shoulder in place, okay? Same can be said from your shoulder blades. They should be able to slide and glide and move, upward, downward rotation, but they also need to have some stability because they are basically kind of really controlling what happens at that shoulder joint itself, okay? So lower cervical should be fairly stable. Upper cervical should be fairly mobile, okay? So when you turn your head, a lot of that motion should come from the upper couple cervical spines, vertebrae, not the whole thing, okay? And then moving into the arm, the elbow should be good and stable, and the wrist should be good and mobile. And that basically is your mobility to stability continuum. And we utilize this when we set up programming or when we watch a person move. We assess them. We realize, okay, this person has a lot of laxity in their lower back and a lot of weakness and instability at that core. So that is right there a recipe for, okay, we need to make their core stronger so that they can stiffen that spot up and potentially get more mobility through the hips or through the T-spine. So we utilize this kind of behind the scenes quite a bit. So I hope you guys got something out of it, and we will see y'all next time. Hey guys, I forgot to mention, just so I don't get a bunch of comments from other professionals talking about this concept, obviously every joint has to have stability and every joint has to have mobility. So I'm not saying that the foot doesn't have to be mobile and the ankle doesn't have to be stable. Obviously that is the case. It's just kind of the degree to which that joint is really needing that particular demand, okay? So whether it needs primarily mobility or primarily stability. So I just wanted to clear that up.